Great to have you listening in today. As with previous seasons, it is my hope that the guests and their stories that I get to share with you this season can provide you with the tools and or insights that you need to know that you can make it through whatever is happening for you now. And not only that, that you can have the life you want in whatever way you want that to look like. So let's get to it. I'm your host, Helen Morris, and this is the beautiful side of grief. You are in for a treat today. My guest has been recognized as a top grief coach by Coach Foundation for the work she does in the field of grief. She is also trained under grief expert David Kessler, trained at the Grief Recovery Institute to become a certified grief recovery expert, and holds many other highly rated credentials in the areas of coaching, grief, positivity, and life skills. So what she will share with you today will be top shelf. Take a listen to this. There was such an intense soul level missing of my sister, longing to talk to her again and tell her how much I loved her. As difficult as those moments were, I realized they were also some of the most healing. In those moments, I learned how to expand my ability to be with my grief, to be with the depth of my love and the sadness of losing my sister. I learned how to walk with that depth of love and sadness with my grief a little bit more every time I went into the wilderness. I truly believe that there is a healing power in that wilderness. That is a small snippet from a blog written by Nesreen Ahmed, who is the founder and CEO of Harbour Light Coaching. It is her hope to help others find that treasured place of peace after experiencing a major change through loss, illness, and or divorce. We're going to talk about how she does that today. Based in New York City with her husband, daughter, and treasured dog, Nesreen takes her coaching skills both across the country and traveling the world, educating and inspiring people to transform their grief. The intention I'm setting for this episode is to understand how coaching specific to grief can help you where other modalities may not, what grief coaching actually is, and why it is important to go through this experience with an expert rather than solo. And to you, I'm surrounding you in love and hope for you to find what it is you most need today, tomorrow, and going forward. So a very warm welcome to you, Nesreen, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's funny, I've not heard a lot of my blog posts read back to me, and I'm like a little emotional about it. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're the one that's done that beautiful, beautiful work. And that's why I say this is top shelf, because anybody who does get the opportunity to read your bio will just know how deeply you have taken a dive into this for your own experiences, but of course to help others from those experiences yourself. So yeah, very excited to be talking with you today. I thought we'd just begin with you sharing a little bit about your sister and the relationship you had with her, because it sounds like you two have a deep connection.
Thank you. Yes. So I have two older sisters. It was my middle sister who passed away. And definitely when we were younger, she was my hero and I wanted to be just like her, and her favorite color, her favorite toy, all of it. I needed to be, exactly like her. And over the years, we had our ebbs and flows. We had our ups and downs for sure. And in my early 30s, our relationship was, coming back together. We were learning how to reconnect and communicate better and just be in our lives more consistently. And then, suddenly she passed away. It was a very unexpected, incredibly overwhelming, traumatic experience for me. I was very fortunate in that I had not had anybody in my immediate family pass away before, but that also means that my parents were losing their daughter, and the intensity of it all was just so overwhelming. Like, I remember
Mm.
having trouble breathing, like having to remind myself to breathe because I would just sit there in my grief so still that I would forget to breathe. It was no longer an automatic. And my sister was such a smart and funny and sarcastic, and everybody loved her. Everybody loved her. She knew how to be the life of the party. She knew how to support people. Like, I remember at her memorial, people coming up to me and telling me stories that I was like, wow, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised because I know her, but I was surprised by how many people she touched and how many people were grateful for a small or a grand gesture that she did, and it was so beautiful and heartbreaking, at the same time, to
Yes.
have lost her. And the world seemed dimmer for a long time after that,
Yeah.
a long time. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years, or almost
Wow.
10 years, I should say.
Almost 10
20
years.
At the end of next year, it'll be 10 years. So it's just like, how is that
Wow.
possible? How is that possible?
Yes. And that's it. Time doesn't stop when we lose someone we treasure. And we often, for me personally, I think, just stop the world, because this has just impacted me so greatly. But life carries on, people carry on, work carries on, and you are often left way back where you were, in those initial stages of grief. Was that how it was for you?
Absolutely. I was so angry. Like, I remember, so at that point I was living in California, but was mostly, I lived most of my adult life in New York City and on the East Coast. And I was moving back to New York, but I went to New York for the memorial service. And I remember walking around angry that New York had not changed, that New York had not
Yes.
stopped. I was like, what is going on with you people? Don't you understand that, like, life is supposed to shut down for a little while? I was angry that life was
Yes.
continuing. And it didn't feel fair. It didn't feel right. And I was like, I don't want any of this. I don't want any of this. I don't want to have to be here. I don't have to move here. I don't have to be at this memorial. I don't want to do any of this. Like, I didn't want the reality that I was experiencing.
Oh, I
And I
so understand that.
I had to fight, and I fought it. I did. I fought it. Like, I was like so angry for quite a while because I was just like, this is not the way life is supposed to go. It's just not.
And was it that anger that led you to seeking out somebody to help you manage that? What was it that took you into your initial sort of counseling or, therapy session?
I think it was a little bit of everything. It was the trauma and the shock. It was the reality starting to set in. It was the anger. It was the intense sadness and grief, and not having any real tools on how to deal with it.
Yeah.
I remember Googling stages of grief and trying to figure out, where was I? Oh, I was definitely in anger. Okay. But
Yeah.
and I learned a lot since then, but I just didn't know anything about grief, and I didn't know anything about how I was, quote unquote, supposed to feel. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to get up out of bed every day and kind of move through my day like a normal human being anymore. And so, yeah, so I started, I'd been in therapy before, so I started back with therapy. And it was unfortunate because I didn't know that not all therapists are trained in grief. And the therapist that I went to was a very kind woman who I think I frustrated because they're just, under normal circumstances, I could have worked with her well, but I didn't need traditional talk therapy at that point. That wasn't
Absolutely.
it. And I didn't know what counseling was or how it differed from therapy, and I'd never even heard of grief coaching. It took me years later to find out about grief coaching. But what I know now is that I really would have benefited from seeing a counselor. But I didn't know that at that point. And so I kind of muddled through with therapy and started going to some support groups, which were also, very nice in a way, but also very, how do I say this?
Just say it. Look, seriously, because it's somebody that's going to completely understand what you're saying when you just share it as it is.
It almost felt like it was taking away the hope that I had. Do you know what I mean? Like the hope that I would feel better was diminishing every time I went because A, I was seeing so many other people who were actively grieving, who'd been grieving longer than I had. But B, there was a moment where, and I'll never forget this, a moment where somebody asked the counselor, how long is too long to be here? Like, when should we start to get worried that we've been coming for too long? You know what I mean? And she said, 2 years. She said, if you've
Oh,
been coming every other week for more than 2 years, then we want to think about complicated grief. We want to think about, maybe seeing a
two
therapist. Blah, blah, blah.
years?
And I was like, I can't breathe. You know what I mean? Like, as soon as she said that, I was like, I'm out. I'm done. Like, no, 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 no. I can't spend 2 years in this really intense,
Oh,
overwhelming state. Like, I can't live like this, and yeah, so I that was actually my last session with the support group, and again, I don't want to bash support groups because I know so many
no.
people that have gotten benefit from them, but for me, it wasn't, like I remember we made a collage one day, and I was like, that's sweet, but like, how is that helping me deal with my grief? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what
Mm,
tools am I learning? What skills am I learning? Where do I get something practical that I can use in my daily life? Because that's what I was really seeking from therapy. That's what I was seeking from the support group. Was like, I need a way to cope with this, like a real life something I can do. I was very
yeah,
much trying to do something with my grief because it was just weighing on me, and I like I said, I couldn't breathe.
yeah. I hear that so often too, about people feeling like they sometimes do get stuck when they're either in support groups online or in person. And like you say, there are some very, very good support groups out there that give you those tools to move through very effectively. But I think it's also to have that awareness that if you are not getting what you need out of them, then that is just a sign for you to perhaps look at something else that might be presented in a different way that would be more beneficial to you.
Mm-hmm.
Was it this experience that led you to pursue grief coaching yourself? Like, was it you wanting to offer people the concrete tools that would help them move on a daily basis or weekly basis?
Yes. I mean, so eventually because there's a lot of things about my life that changed after my sister died, including my career and the trajectory of my career. And so I started in a training program for life and business coaching. And it was a year-long program. About like a third of the way into that program, somebody mentioned that they were like, oh, I just met a grief coach. And I was like, do you mean grief counselor? And she said, no, a grief coach. And I was like,
Yes.
I didn't know that grief coaching existed. I didn't know that was available. And coaching has expanded so much
Hmm.
since I was first trained, but especially back then I had no idea. And so I immediately was like, I'm interested, but also a little scared, a little hesitant, so it took me a while to actually pick up that phone, but when I actually ended up working with her, it was the grief recovery method, and it was the information that I was learning, but also having to write every week and then having to speak to her every week. And so it did feel like it gave me something to do. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't
Yeah.
me just going and talking to somebody, and it wasn't me just sitting around feeling awful or, trying to watch too much TV so I could forget, or, like it gave me something proactive to do. And that felt so good. It
Can you
felt
give us some
so good.
examples of, what sorts of things that you were asked to do, that would
Sure.
be, yeah.
So basically, the grief recovery method, it's a book here. I actually have it right here. It's a process that you're basically coached through. And, you read a few chapters at a time, sometimes one chapter, sometimes two or three. And you basically, you read about the two authors and their experience of grief and loss. And then you start to kind of see, oh, yeah, I also had an experience like that. Or, oh, they talk about different cliches that we're
Hmm.
all told that have
Yes.
nothing, no benefit whatsoever, right? Like, time heals
Mm,
all. No, no,
mm,
it doesn't. Like, just be strong. How do you be strong?
yeah.
Stay busy. Well, that's not really going to attend to my grief. You know what I mean? Like, so you
Yeah.
hear all these different things that are very unhelpful, but people say because they don't know what else to say. She's in a better place.
Exactly.
How dare you? You know what I mean? Like, who's to say? And it's better if she's with me. You know what I mean? So it's like you hear all these things that again are just really unhelpful. So I learned that, and then I learned about you kind of list out the different ways that you avoid grief or try to deal with it, right? So sometimes people are very healthy and they exercise a lot and they're cooking and they eat well and they go on hikes. I did some of that, but I also was like, yeah, I'm not going to be so healthy. I'm going to sit on the couch all day. I'm going to sleep a lot more. I'm going to,
Yes.
drugs and alcohol. People do all kinds of things to
Yep.
escape how they're feeling, right? And so you kind of talk about those and what are you experiencing? What are you doing? How can we limit the maybe negative things and kind of increase those healthier aspects of our habits? And then, as it goes through, you start to look at the relationship you have, or you start to look at all the losses that you've had, and then you choose the relationship that you really want to focus on. For me, it was my sister. And we talked about the ups and downs in our relationship and the things that I said that I regret, or the things that I want to apologize for, the things that I want to forgive her for. And so it felt very holistic and very thorough, because it really gave you an opportunity to examine, first of all, your whole life in terms of your losses and to understand like, oh, I was really grieving during that time. I had no idea that I was grieving. And then to really look at the relationship and all the things that feel like they were unfinished or incomplete, like especially if even no matter what, but especially if you lose somebody suddenly, there's that abrupt end where like, I know I felt very guilty because I owed my sister a text message. I never sent it to her, and so there was a lot of guilt around that and having to work through and forgive myself for that and trust that, she would understand. And so, yeah, stuff like that. So it felt very proactive. It felt very informative, and it really touched my heart, and I will say, like, I tell people, there's a bit of magic in there. Like there is the science of like reading and writing and then speaking that helps your brain process differently. That's why journaling can be so helpful. But there's some magic in there that as you go through it, if you trust the process, you do walk away with like a lighter, a feeling of lighter, more at peace. You kind of sense that, okay, things are definitely getting better, but you don't know why, and I've had so many people experience that at the end of it. So I really trust this process. And it's not the only, way that I work with people, but it is one of the main ways, especially for people who've had some difficulty within their relationship with their lost loved one.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at the ways you do work with people. But prior to that, you mentioned about the guilt you felt and forgiveness and things like that. And, I'm coming to understand that I think for most people who suffer grief, the guilt goes hand in hand with that. There is often, and a lot of it is unspoken. It's just deep inside of you, what if I had just, and somehow thinking that would have changed things, that would have made a difference. And I think it's very important to recognize that guilt as part of the grief process and to work through that as well. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that has lost somebody that doesn't feel some amount of guilt for something, whether it was something long ago or something that happened very recent, in their relationship. And it is absolutely natural. And it is something like, it's a real practice to be able to forgive yourself, especially when you can't apologize, or especially when you can't communicate what you want to communicate, and to also recognize that, what happened, and there's no way that you could have changed it. There's no way that you could have foreseen it, even as much as we think we can, wish we could.
Yeah.
What happened.
Yeah. And for some people, that's a quick process. And for others, they need to go over it and through it, a number of times before they reach that point that, this is acceptance of what has happened, even though it sucks dreadfully. You also mentioned that just as you were speaking just before that you didn't realize that what you were experiencing was grief, when you started to look at things. Just open up a little bit more around that, because I also feel that there are lots of instances we have in our lives where we are going through grief and we don't recognize it. So can you share with us what that's like for people and how they can recognize it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's over, I think, 60 different things that can happen that can cause grief, and some people, like, it's funny. So I had my daughter a few years ago, my first child, and I think we underestimate the grief that comes along with becoming a parent. I mean, of course,
Mm-hmm.
I was overjoyed, but I also felt a sense of loss. I lost my freedom, and I lost the ability to just go, whether it was to the store or go on vacation or whatever. I lost my ability to
Yes.
sleep. You know what I mean? Like, there were a lot more limitations and restrictions on my life, and I'm not happy with that. You know what I mean?
And
Like,
you feel
there's
like a bad parent, don't you?
yes,
Like if you
yeah,
admit
but
that,
you tell
yeah.
anybody, I don't share that. Yeah, I'm supposed to be elated and joyful, and you know what I mean. But like, of course, there's a bit of grief in that. There's some grief in getting
Mm,
married sometimes. You know what I mean. There's, of course, grief in divorce. And illness and loss of health or well-being, financial situations. A lot of
mm,
people were grieving during COVID because they lost their jobs. They loved their jobs and they lost their jobs, or
mm.
they lost that financial stability that allowed them to, take care of their families. Like, there's so many different things that we go through. And it is about recognizing this is a huge change for me. This is a change in my everyday life, my everyday pattern or routine. Moving can be a grieving experience. I mean, I definitely, when I moved to California from New York, I grieved New York, and then I grieved California when I moved back, and so I think
Yes.
I mean, I can go on and on, pregnancy loss and miscarriage and infertility, and, I mean, like,
Hmm.
so many more things that I think people are willing to talk about now and own that, or admit that there's grief attached to them, and finally starting to understand, oh wow,
Yes.
that what I'm feeling right now is actually grief, and
Yeah.
I think it's so helpful when you can actually identify it and label it, because then you understand, okay, here's how
Yeah.
it might go. What can I kind of expect? How to treat myself better. I can be more gentle and compassionate with myself because I'm not going to be operating at 100%. So I think when you start to really understand what you're feeling and own it as grief, there is, in a way, there is a lot more opportunity for self-care, to get the kind of care that you need externally, and to just, in general, kind of buoy yourself.
Yeah. I often think it takes a deep loss for us to start us on that trajectory of recognizing all those other
Mm.
griefs, experiences of grief that we, may have had along the line, because, we often just suppress them because we're so conditioned that this is how you should be, this is how you should act, this is what you should talk about, should not talk about, and all those sorts of things. So it's just like that, not admitting to being a bad parent, because you're not totally happy with this parenting caper, and the, profound changes that have come with it. And I want to sort of also talk about, the profound change of your life and the way you think when you have that type of loss as well, because suddenly life does look differently. It's like you've suddenly got a new pair of lenses that you're seeing life with, and what you thought mattered no longer matters anymore. Share with me how that was for you, because had you looked at your life as meaningful prior to your sister's loss as you do now?
No,
What was
no.
really meaningful in it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny. I feel like a completely different person. I
Yeah,
honestly
I
do.
would agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Like, grief changes you, loss like that changes you, and hopefully in a good way. Right. But I definitely used to complain a lot more. I think I felt victimized very easily, and I was very dissatisfied with my life overall, and felt kind of powerless to change it, and just, yeah, just not a very happy person in general, and a lot less careful with my words, and how I treated people, for sure, for sure. I mean, I'm not trying to hate on myself, but I'm glad that I'm not that person anymore. I'm glad that I've changed in the ways that I've changed. I've definitely focused on being more grateful, being more present, trying to focus on the positives that I do have. Certainly
Mhm.
in my relationships, I did, a complete flip where it was just like, people in my life have to know how much I care. That's just a rule
Yes.
now. Like, you're not allowed to be one of my people, one of my tribe, and not know how much I love you. Like, that's not
Oh,
okay anymore, you know? And yeah, just, you know, I mean, I know that I pursued a lot of different like healing modalities and tried different things. And most recently, I actually saw a trauma therapist and healed a lot of my childhood trauma I didn't even know was trauma, you know, and I've really been on this journey over the last 9 years to heal so many things about my life and myself because I suddenly saw what was important. And I also became much more willing to take risk, calculated
mm-hmm.
risk, but to jump into things and to try new things because I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, you don't know how long you're going to live. You don't know what
Mm-hmm.
this person could offer or what this person could bring. You don't know what this situation could offer, you know? And so that willingness to take more bold risk and to start a company, you know, start a coaching
Mm.
company and, you know, do all the things that's required for that. You know, I think that I'm much more focused on living a meaningful life and a fulfilling life because it could end at any point.
What you just described could be me talking and saying
No.
those exact same things because that is exactly what I experienced as well. And I would even, go one step further to say that just the other day, I was speaking with one of my sisters, and she said, "Gosh, I can see how much you've grown over these past years since losing Tal." And she says it's incredible to watch, and I think that one of the biggest things for me is that I've become much kinder to
Mm.
myself, and I've learned to really love who I am. And that has been huge for me. That's been life changing for me
Mm.
in particular. And that's what I always encourage to people. Look in that mirror and just love who you are, because you don't know what is around the corner tomorrow. So you deserve to love yourself first and foremost, and who you are, with and without all the imperfections that you carry, because you are meant to be this person that you are. You
Mm.
can't often change many of the things you don't like about yourself. So let's just live in a culture where we can really embrace them and say, okay,
Mm.
so it's not your cup of tea, but that's okay. This is,
Mhm.
I'm going to own who I am, and step into that light. So,
I love that.
yeah.
I love
So
that. And
let's
can
talk.
I can I add
Yep.
one thing to that? Because I
Yeah,
think
sure.
especially I mean I think this is sort of universal, but I know especially here with the clients I work with in America, the idea of worthiness comes up like
Oh,
24/7. You know what I mean? It's like,
yes.
oh my God, I'm not worthy. Oh my God. And it's about, for us, it's about
Yeah.
productivity. You know, how much did
Mhm.
I get done today? How much did I get done in my job? Am I doing enough? The to-do list is never ending, blah, blah, right? And, you know, a lot of what I talk about is that idea of having a newborn child. You know, is the newborn child worthy because they sat up or, because they spit up or what would make them worthy, right? You know,
Mm,
and if you can relate to that, if you can understand that, like looking at your child, let's say your child is worthy no matter what, right? It's not about
mm,
proving anything and it's not about fixing anything and it's not about producing anything, but it's just about who they are and their being. Then you carry that over to yourself and think about you are worthy because you are human, because you're alive, because of what you bring to the world, not because of what you do. And if we can start
yes.
to own that and recognize that our value is not based on external factors, then I think that door to loving yourself becomes that much more available, more open, and
Yes.
you can step through it.
That's such a good analogy. I love that. How do you go about helping someone to understand, manage, and take responsibility for their grief, especially when they're at their most vulnerable?
Well, so most of the people that I work with, not all, but I would say a good majority of the people that I've worked with have had a decent amount of time between their loss and when they're working with me. So a lot
Hmm.
of them are ready.
Yes.
Actually, literally spoke with somebody this morning who lost his mother suddenly less than a month ago. And for somebody like that, I would recommend grief counseling as a first step, because coaching is about moving you forward. So certainly the grief recovery method, and certainly, the idea of forward action can be helpful, but he needs to just sit, right? He's so deep in the shock and the trauma and the grief that it's really hard for him to breathe, right? And to get up out of bed and to go to his job, that he needs more tools to just learn how to get back to living, right? And so for somebody like that, that's when I would definitely refer out, because I want them to get the tools. And I might have some, but that's not my focus in working with people. And I don't ever want to, especially with somebody who's grieving, I don't ever want to lead them down a path they're not ready for. It's going to waste their time. It's going to frustrate them. I'm going to feel like I'm not doing my job well. There's no need for it. But I have a client who lost her mother a few months ago, and she's very ready for the idea of some tools and some structure and some weekly calls. And so, we do talk about that healing is your responsibility. As me as a coach, I can pull you along as much as I can, encourage you. I can, cheerlead for you. I'll never shame or judge, but, I can try to push you along, but you have to do the work, right? It is about you taking the action. It is about you doing the work. It is about you recognizing that healing is a proactive process, and might be, a tiny little step every week, and that's fine. But that's something, right? That's progress. That's movement. And that's what we want.
Yeah, that has to come from within. That person has to be ready for those changes to come from within. What are effective skills versus non-effective skills in coping with grief?
It's a broad question. Okay, so I'm very much an advocate for trying to grieve well. And what I mean by that is be healthy as much as you can. I know it's so hard to eat. Sometimes I know how hard it can be to sleep or to get up after, wanting more sleep, but trying to take care of yourself physically, first of all. So eating well, movement of some kind, and sleep. Those are kind of the three pillars that you need for a stable physical well-being, right? And that will help boost you up in terms of your mental and emotional and spiritual self. So that's kind of the first thing. I won't say that drugs and alcohol and, comfort eating and that kind of thing, retail therapy, they're not bad when done in moderation, right? If you're going to be excessively spending money, excessively drinking, then you're really not helping yourself in the long run. And especially with something, if you're taking it in physically, it's going to have a huge effect on your emotions, and your ability to regulate your emotions, especially if you're hitting a grief wave or something like that. So I'm trying to limit those as much as possible. Some of the other things that I mentioned is recognizing that while this feels, impossible to deal with, it's not going to last forever, or how you feel in this moment will not be how you feel forever. So just keep in mind that it might be unbearable today, might be unbearable tomorrow, but maybe next month, in a few months, it might feel a little less, maybe 5% less, unbearable, something like that. So, again, we're not looking for leaps and bounds. It's baby steps towards progress. It's baby steps of some kind of movement. And a big fan of mindfulness, deep breathing, meditation, exercise. I know a couple people that really love tapping, EFT, and I really enjoyed acupuncture when I was grieving. That was sort of the one moment where I had to sit still and I really had to feel, in the beginning. And that was very helpful for me because I kind of avoided stillness in those early days. Yeah, I think, exercise, like I said, and community as much as you can. Isolation can lead to more grief or increase the level of grief that we feel. So find people you feel safe with, find people you feel comfortable with that will hold you in your grief and let you be exactly how you are. You don't have to put on a face or put on a front, and try to be with them. Those are your people right now. So try to be with them as much as you can without overdoing it. You don't want to completely, avoid your grief, but you also don't want to sit in grief consistently every single day, day in, day out. Like, I think,
it's exhausting, isn't it?
oh my God. Well, and I think people feel like, we feel like we have to. We're not allowed to laugh. We're not allowed to feel good. We're not allowed to have that
Yeah.
respite because we loved our person so much. And this is so devastating. But it's like, we need that respite. You need that movie.
Yeah.
You need that glass of wine. You need in moderation to not process, to just be a human for a few minutes, to just be around people for a few minutes, to try to have some sense of normalcy for a few minutes, and I think it's that balance that keeps people going and keeps people able to go, and able to move through. Because if you're just in your grief all the time, 24/7, there's no relief, there's no hope,
Yes.
there's no, there's nothing but that grief, and it's too intense.
I recall speaking with somebody I interviewed a wee while ago, and she was saying that she had a friend who used to message her jokes, like every Friday morning or, like once a week or something like that. And how much she valued that one gesture. And that was his thing. That was his way of helping her, was to message her crazy jokes that would just make her laugh. And she said that, that feeling of just being able to laugh and the release, and it starts to rebalance your body then, because like you say, to live in that state of grief and heartache and sadness. And although that may last for years and years in different phases, you can't sustain that. And it's not a balanced body that you have when you're just living in that state. So those are really, really good tips that you've just given us to recognize and to know how we can, try different things to get out of it. So your goal with your coaching is to get people back to living a meaningful and happy lives. But just before we go there, I think it's really important for us to understand the roles of a grief counselor versus that of a grief coach. Are you able just to really make those clear for us so people understand when they need to seek out a grief counselor versus a grief coach, and why the grief part is so important?
Yeah, I actually, I felt, because of my experience when I lost my sister, and in struggling to find somebody who felt like they were a good fit for me and giving me the tools that I needed, I actually created an assessment on my website that helps people understand kind of where, what phase of grief, where they are in their grief, and then should they see a therapist, a counselor, or a coach. And it's all grief related. So I do share with people, make sure that if you decide to see a therapist, they are trained in grief, because not all are. And if you're going to go see a grief therapist, it's likely that you are experiencing, what they call complicated grief, which is kind of a misnomer, but grief that's really preventing you from living your daily life, moving through your daily routine. You may have had a very complicated relationship with the person that passed away, and or that loss maybe bring up a lot of other complicated losses. And so you're really struggling just to get through the day. That's when a grief therapist can be most helpful. A grief counselor very often can give you tools and resources and support in the immediate aftermath of the loss. So it might even be like a year out, but especially in those early days of grief, that's when a grief counselor can really be supportive and really help you, again, start to kind of wrap your head around this, start to give you some tools to be able to move through life and process what you're experiencing. And then coaching, I think it would vary, or may vary a little bit within the coaching spectrum. But for me, I usually tend to work with people who've already gone to a therapist or support group or counselor. And so they've done some grief work already, but there's still something that's holding them back from that meaningful life and from feeling really at peace with what's happened. And so for me, most people, again, kind of the range is usually a year or more since they've gone through their loss, but obviously not always. But they're really looking at like, okay, I've gone through this loss. I've done some processing. Now what? What's next? I still don't feel quite right. I'm definitely not satisfied in these other areas. I want to make some changes. I want to feel better overall. And that's where I really come in, and I kind of, we work together a lot of times, again, through the grief recovery method to kind of address what still feels unfinished within their grief. But then we also look at like, okay, what else do we need to do? Like the client that I have who lost her mother, she's like, I need to stop working so much. I want to, in the next 2-3 years, I want to go part-time. I need to start living more. I want to enjoy my life. I want to travel. I want to see more of the world, et cetera, et cetera. So she's looking at like, as we go through our work together, she's looking at like, how can I start to set myself up financially and also set myself up with my work so that I can go part-time in 2 or 3 years, so it's stuff like that where you really want to start like living, and I have some clients who want to find a relationship, they're tired of being single, and they really want to, have children soon, and they want to start, a new kind of lifestyle. And so, that family life that they've been wanting, but kind of avoiding or putting off, or they've got time or whatever it is. Right. And so when they go through that loss, they're like, no, I really want to meet my person now. I really want to have a relationship, and so it's that kind of thing where you start thinking about, now that this has happened, I've taken stock of my life and I'm not so happy with it. I'm not so thrilled. What else can I do? How can I do it so that I do feel more satisfied? I am, living the kind of life and lifestyle that I really dream about.
And it's to have the confidence, isn't it? To be thinking that, my life wasn't as great as I thought it was before. But that's all I knew. So it's having the confidence to say, yeah, I can actually go a completely different, path and find something I really want to be doing now, which is exactly what I did. I just gave away the career that I was just on the brink of really making some big headway into, just gave it all away. And I actually went and worked as a medical receptionist until I could work out what it was I wanted to do next, and those sorts of things. But it's giving people the confidence to say, if that's what your heart is feeling, and you're feeling like you're needing to be making these changes, what's some of the guilt or what are some of the things that may be preventing you from doing that? Yeah, grief coaching. I just want to share with you, because when you say a lot of people would have gone to a grief counselor, that may be true of Americans, but here in New Zealand, very few people ever go to see therapists or counselors. We are very stoic, I think, in managing life. I was just going to say grief, but actually in managing life, we very rarely share and especially seek counseling. And for that reason, I don't think now, when we recognize that we need to be having that additional support, especially post-pandemic, we just don't have the trained specialists out there. They're very few in number. So we've got a bit of a crisis here. But I just wanted to share that because I know it's so typically Kiwi not to do that.
I'm like, should I move to New Zealand? Is that what I'm hearing? I should move to New Zealand.
Yeah. The other thing that you were talking about was that incredible online tool. Now, I went and had a look at that, and that is a very, very comprehensive assessment tool. Not too dissimilar with some I've looked at and worked with in, my previous role in health. So I highly recommend that people go and check that out and find out where they are with what they're needing, because, like you say, it can just point them into the next avenue. Now, that's free on your website, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you put your email and stuff like that so you can get the results. And literally for people who need a therapist or a counselor, I send out a total of 3 emails. And then it's like, if you ever want, you can join my newsletter. Like, I'm never spamming people. It's not constant, because you don't need me. You don't need me at all right now, and so why, bombard people with information that may not be helpful to them. So it's totally free. And really my intention is that people get just a better understanding of where they are, what kind of, resources are available that would actually help them. So they're not searching. Cause you have to, with any, professional, you have to meet a couple already to figure out who's going to be a better fit for you. you might, like I met with I think it was 3 different therapists before I chose the therapist that I ended up working with when I was grieving, because I still needed that connection. I still needed to know that I could trust them, that I could feel safe. And a lot of people don't understand that. It's not about just,
Yes.
okay, I'll go to this counselor. And then it's like, I hate this counselor. I don't want to talk to this person. And then they stop seeing seeing anybody. And it's
And
like,
then
no.
you don't share anything because
Exactly.
you're shut down.
Exactly. And so it's like you need to have, a couple different consultations to understand. So at least you can, hopefully with the assessment, people don't have to see 3 different therapists and then 3 different counselors and then a coach to find out, oh, I really need to see a counselor. It's like you at least have an idea or some parameters of okay, I really should see a therapist. So let me try and find 2 or 3 different therapists I can talk to see which one feels like it's a good fit, and if none of them do, keep searching, you know what I mean? But it's like, just to make life a little easier, especially when we're grieving. It's so hard to pick up the phone to ask for anything. It's so hard to say, hey, I need help. It's so hard to say, I
Yes.
can't do this on my own. And, the more that we practice that, the easier it gets. But, it's incredibly difficult. And so hopefully the assessment just helps you at least get a better sense of where you should start to look.
Thank you, Nesreen, because that is such good advice.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think we should be doing better in the grief arena?
How much time do we have left?
Probably not as much as we need to. That be a whole new episode.
Oh my gosh. Talking, listening, being with. How many people do you know when you lost your daughter were like, she's in a better place, or don't be sad, whatever platitudes that just don't help, and time will heal, just stay strong and be patient, and God's with you, whatever people are saying. It's so much of it is insulting, is either trying to fix the other person or not really addressing their grief, addressing this huge hole that they now have in their life. We're not taught how to deal with loss. So we're not taught how to be with people when they're in the middle of loss. And I think that is one of the biggest factors in people isolating and not going to support groups or not going to therapists and counselors, et cetera. They're not seeking the help they need, because I can tell you, I had a friend compare my sister's death to her dog dying. And I was like, oh, we're never going to be friends again. That was just the end of that. You know what I mean? I was just, and I know she meant well, but I was like, you don't compare losses. don't do, so anyway, so I think there's a lot just to be learned in terms of being with people and holding space and being safe, learning what to say.
I don't think we're educated. I don't think we're educated to be able to speak that language correctly, and to know, because I know that most people are coming from a really well-meaning place when they're saying those platitudes that just seem to just never ever hit the mark properly. But I always say, well, at least they're showing up. At least they're trying to be there for you, even if they're getting it horribly wrong. Mm-hmm. And the reason I give them so much grace is because, I recognize myself in that person. Mm-hmm. Prior to losing my daughter. I would have been one of those people, probably, saying one of those dreadful platitudes and thinking I was doing the right thing and, totally missing the mark, because I just didn't know what else to say that was going to be appropriate or helpful or meaningful. And I do think that we need to be educated much more on just how to talk that language. Mm-hmm. And how to support people.
If you have any listeners that want to support a griever, just Googling, there's so many new articles out there in the world, so many things, do's and don'ts, what to say, what not to say, blog articles, all kinds of things, and so it can be, if you're motivated, it can be very easy to get educated. But I think it is about just sort of general education and really helping people understand that, these remarks very often just feel empty, and feel hurtful in a way. But I do really appreciate what you're saying in terms of giving people grace and at least they're showing up. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, well, like I just knew that, like you say, when that it's a shock loss, it's totally unexpected. And my daughter was like that. She made such an impact on so many people and across so many different areas. So at her funeral, she had this packed out funeral of so many people. Even her first teacher traveled down to be at her funeral because this was one sassy out there, child, who was not afraid to be herself, who was loud and crazy and beautiful and everything else that goes with it. And suddenly she was gone. And people were going, oh my gosh, where is she gone? Why is she gone? I don't get that she's gone. And yeah, I just think that, I don't even know where I was going with that, to be honest with you, when I started that. Oh yeah, that was about the suddenness of losing somebody. And I think that puts us into a state of being, and, we're not thinking clearly. We're not thinking to Google, how can I help somebody that's going to be meaningful, rather than, baking food and bringing around food that nobody feels like eating anyway. And then you have to deal with it, that sort of thing. But yes, yeah, there's lots of really good resources out there. So if you do have that opportunity, by all means, just take a couple of minutes and Google. Yeah. Nesreen, I want to ask you, what is the biggest thing from your experience in coaching and going through all these wonderful programs? What's the biggest thing someone needs to know or recognize when they are grieving?
I'm afraid I sound a little bit like a broken record, but I think it is that they're not alone, that there are people out there who can help, that there are people out there to walk with them, that there are people who've gone through a similar loss, if not, the same type of loss, and want to help, want to be there, that have understood and learned how to hold space and offer a safe place to grieve, and learn how to grieve well. And I think, life is about connection. Ultimately, life is about
Beautiful.
the interactions and the connections that we make in our life. And particularly when we're, on our knees or, in the fetal position on the floor and we can't get up, like what's more important, than being able to get lifted up in some way.
Yes. Oh, that's very, very beautiful. So true too. In our isolation and our grief, we can forget that there are many others who may not have gone through exactly the same thing as you, but may have gone through something similar. And indeed, sometimes grief is just exactly that, grief, and with connecting with people who just want to be there for you and hold that space for you while you try and pick up the pieces and try and make sense of your life again is so valuable. And yeah, so Dave, it almost makes me want to cry. That why do I want to cry when I'm saying that? That's crazy. And that's a thing too, you cry when you least expect it, don't you? Even after years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, those beautiful things that trigger you. Now, before I get into the questions I always ask at the end of an interview, I want to know, what is the most treasured memory you have of your sister?
Okay. So one of the things that I'm most grateful for is a really healing conversation that we had the summer before she died. It was what had started us back on the path to really getting connected and being in each other's lives. And I remember I was out in California. I believe I was on a hike, and I was talking to her while I was walking and just telling her that she's been my hero and how much I missed her and how much I loved her. And she's like, oh my God, I had no idea. And, I love you so much. And, I'm so sorry that things have been, stressed between us for a while. And I don't want that, and we just had this really beautiful conversation. And that was one of the things that got me through. to be honest. That like just knowing that I had said so many important things and how I felt, and knowing that she heard them, and she was reciprocating, like that to me was absolutely like one of my lifelines when I was grieving, and I'm just so grateful that we had that conversation.
Wow. And that's like what you said. Tell everybody how you feel about them. Don't wait, and don't expect them to understand or assume they know what you feel, because that's what a lot of us, she knows I love her. Well, how? If you never say anything and you never hug them, or, how do they know? Because everybody's love language is different, so, we need to be out there showing people and telling people how much we love them and how much we care about them.
And we don't always understand the impact of what we're doing or saying either. I had a conversation with my father recently where he's like, we had this, very, very brief interaction years ago. He's like, that stayed with me. He told me about it. And I was like, huh? Like, I don't really? I don't remember that at all, but okay. But like for him, it was really meaningful. And I'm so glad that he shared that with me, because I would never have thought of it, or never have known. And so I think that's the other thing, is that, we know that our loved ones love us, but we don't always understand what it is that stays with them. What are these memory making moments? What are these impactful moments for them? And to hear it, it's like, oh, that's so nice. That makes me feel so good, doesn't it? It's just like, so I think that's the other reason to share, is that, we don't always understand what's going to be important to the other person.
Absolutely. And there's something else I just thought about that I need to ask you. You talked, when I read out that piece, it talks about wilderness. It talks about you being in the wilderness. Can you describe what the wilderness looks like for you? Sorry.
I love these questions. In those moments, it was just raw emotion. I mean, I literally was like clinging to my kitchen counter on my knees, just like crying, like my heart was coming up out of my throat. And like the intensity of the emotion and the rawness of it and the like full body experience of it was unlike anything I'd experienced before, and I think it's those moments where we really feel it and we really like surrender to it for however long it takes. That's a huge part of the healing process, is that feeling and allowing it to overwhelm us and overtake us, and know that we can come out on the other side, But yeah, I mean, for me, it was just like, such an intense, full body, emotional rawness.
Yeah. I think sitting in that wilderness and experiencing it and surrendering to it, like you say, is actually what can then guide us to the light that's going to slowly help us make sense of it all.
Yeah.
Because you're not suppressing it. You're actually allowing it to come up in all its rawness and all its ugliness. In all its purity, because it is pure, raw emotion. And and when you allow yourself to feel that, that's sometimes what is the release that then opens up perhaps another door to you. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to change it up completely and ask you, what is the best thing that's happened to you so far today?
Oh my goodness, the best thing that's happened to me so far today. Every little interaction with my daughter before taking her to daycare this morning, like the kisses and the hugs and the like. She's
How old is she?
Cuddly. She's almost 3. She's like going to be 3 in a few more months. And just like, everything. I mean, like, she's still a 2-year-old from anyway. But when she's feeling in a good mood and she's cuddly, it's just like, it's the best thing in the whole world. It's the best thing in the whole world.
Absolutely. What do you consider to be your proudest moment today?
Gosh, I think the thing I'm most proud of is like you mentioned earlier, I think even before we were recording, the impact that your daughter's death had on you and how much you've grown. And I think that I feel that way about my daughter's birth. I've had to grow and heal so much in order to be the kind of mother that I want to be.
Boom. Oh my gosh, that is beautiful. Because do you know, I always say that my daughter was a gift to me because I loved her so much. I just always wanted to try and be the best mother I could be to her, which meant actually facing up to many of the parts of me that weren't working so well or weren't so healthy, and my perfectionist tendencies and all those sorts of things. I had to deal with them. Mm-hmm. And I know that when she went, we were just, oh gosh, we just had the most beautiful, open, unconditional, loving relationship that I'm so proud of to this day. And I can see the same thing happening for you with your beautiful girl. And oh gosh, that just fills my heart up. Okay, anyway, when you are having moments in your day that are not going well, and we know with 2-year-olds, that can definitely happen. So when you're having those moments, what do you do? What's your go-to?
Lately, it's deep breaths. It's reminding myself, this is temporary. It's not going to be forever. And then laughter, trying to make her laugh, trying to make myself laugh, just thinking of doing something silly, whatever it is I can, you know what I mean? Just trying to break that tension to move on to the next thing, So definitely deep breaths, self-talk, and laughter. Those are kind of the 3 easiest things or quickest go-tos right now.
Beautiful. Nesreen Ahmed, I have to say to you, what an absolute pleasure it has been to spend this hour with you, just running through, from your wisdom and all your experiences and being able to share with our listeners some beautiful, beautiful information. And I'm very grateful for you taking the time to do that with us. And so thank you very much. As always, we will have all the links to your website and to that online form where people can get access to and to check out your beautiful work that you do, Harbor Light Coaching. It is, and I, whenever I say that word, I just think of this big lighthouse with the light, being that beacon that is showing you the way. And that's what I think of when I say your business name. I know with all the training and experience that you've amassed over these years, you are able to offer people some beautiful insights and tools and step alongside of them in their journey. So, yeah, thank you very much, very, very much for being with me today.
Thank you so much. This has been such an absolute pleasure and honor, and I have really, really enjoyed the conversation. I hope that your listeners are also able to enjoy it as much as I have.
I'm sure they will. Thank you. Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. Let me know how I'm doing, or if there's a topic you'd like covered, by clicking on the Healing to Be You Gmail link or going to the Healing to Be You website. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button and please share if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode. Until next time, be kind to you and take good care.